Okay, I won't ruin Advent scenes for you, or nativity scenes for you. And hopefully, maybe you don't have this nativity scene at home, but there's the baby Jesus there in the manger, in the stable, there's the star, and it's just this beautiful nativity scene for celebrating Christmas. But what you will never be able to unsee once you've seen it is that two T-Rexes sharing a meal together or fighting over a meal, or whatever that looks like. And once you see that, you'll never be able to see this same exact nature just in the same way again. So I hope you don't have this one in your yard, and I hope it didn't ruin it. But if you do, come let us paint it green. I think that'd be fun. Either way, once you have that aha moment, like you're never Exodus 34, 6, and 7 does that for you. That once you hear this God, every time you're asked that question, what is God like? That these passages, that these words would just be burned into your heart and mind, that you'd never be able to see God any differently. This is what would come to mind. And so in order to do that, one of the things that we're doing as we go through Advent is we're reading this exact passage every single time we gather at the very beginning. And I want us to all stand together and to read it together, so that hopefully after 4 or 5 times gathering together, that we've read this out loud together, it can be burned on our heart and minds that we would never be able to see God differently again, that we'd never be able to unsee it. And so I'm going to begin reading this. You guys will read the quotations, right? We did this before. It's in bold. So I'm going to start reading, and we'll all read together. Once I finish that phrase, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, that will be your cue. We're going to read this all together. This is Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 through 7. The Lord passed before him, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers to the third and the fourth generation. This is God's holy word. Well done. You may have a seat. So this Advent, we're working our way through this passage, and these attributes have been broken down historically to be referred to as the 13 midot, or the 13 attributes of mercy. And we're making our way through these attributes each week. Last week, we talked about the first two, which are repeated, the Lord, And we talked about how important it is that God even has a name. That's the name of God, because he's a person, and he's personal. And today, we're going to be looking at these three: compassionate, gracious, slow to anger. Now, you might be wondering, Evan, are you skipping one? Are you skipping number 3? Actually, yes, I am skipping it. We'll come back to it. But because of the way that the math was going to work out, what was going to happen is we were going to go through all these attributes, and then on Christmas Eve, we were going to be left with God visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children. And I was told that's not a great topic for Christmas Eve. We're going to come back to number 3 for this so far. But either way, and slow to anger. This is how God has described himself. When Moses asked God, show me your glory, show me what you are like, God said, I'm merciful, I'm compassionate, I'm gracious, I'm slow to anger. And so looking at this first one, as you'll notice, some of your versions of the Bible might have the word merciful, some might have the word compassion. In the Hebrew, it's the word rakum, or rachum. And it's often translated as merciful, compassionate. Oftentimes, even the ESV that we read there will translate it as pity. And this big word has all of these different words attached. Just another form of the word is actually the Hebrew word for womb. It's the Hebrew word for womb. And the reason that this word then is connected to compassion and to mercy is because it's describing this feeling, this emotion that a mother would have for the child in her womb. It's this fatherly parental love, that mercy, that compassion that can only be described by this relationship that God has created in a mother and a child. So we see this example in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 15, where it says, can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion or rachum on the son of her womb? And God makes this statement, even if a mother could forget the child in her womb, I will not forget my people. It's like, I'm the ultimate picture of that feeling. That is how I feel. Where your brothers and your children will find compassion and will not turn his face away from you if you return to him. And so we see this in many different ways, that God is begging his people to come back to him, that God is expressing to his people, I feel towards you the way that a parent loves a child. It is this incomparable love and compassion. And this word raccoon that we're looking at here, it's a feeling word. It's a feeling word. It's an emotion. And what we all need to hear and what we should all understand is that this is how God feels towards you. That God feels the way a mother would feel towards her child about you. The same thing that would lead a mother to be willing to get up and lose sleep for 21 months is how God feels about you. It's that same love, compassion. This is God's default feeling towards his people. Oftentimes when you get into the New Testament, or if you look at the Greek manuscripts of the Old Testament there, you'll have the word splanchnizomai, or some of your resources might spell it splanchnizomai, which is a similar idea. That's the Greek word that's translated here as compassion or as mercy. And it's also similarly connected to your region here, whereas the Hebrew word comes from the word womb. The Greek word comes from the idea of being sick to your stomach. Someone where you can physically feel it in your gut. I often remember it by calling it slag. Some of the resources will call it splanchnizomai, but all throughout the Gospels, oftentimes the word that was used there was this splanchnizomai. Places like Matthew chapter 9, where Jesus is going around, and Matthew 9:35 just says he was going around healing everyone and fixing everything. That's kind of the gospel writer's way of like inserting that, hey, there was a montage here. There's like all these things you can imagine Jesus like doing it all. And then in verse 36, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion. He had splanchnizomai, feeling in his stomach. He had this draw like a mother to a child for the crowds because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. That's what Jesus said. They were harassed and helpless. And Jesus looked out and they were harassed by their own consequences. And they were helpless to do anything about it. Helpless to defeat their sin from these patterns. They were harassed. They were helpless. And Jesus was moved with compassion towards them. Moved with compassion towards the people. And so Jesus, when he sees sin, when he sees our mistakes, when he sees us, and the consequences even of our own sin and of our own actions, we have to know that if he's a God of a parent towards us, he doesn't just look at us and go, the consequences, that harassment and helplessness you have is just your fault, get over it, move on. No, he feels compassion. He wants to do something about it. And kids hurt themselves doing the most ridiculous things. There's an entire industry that is built on videos of kids getting hurt, and it's honestly hilarious, right? America's Funniest Home Videos ran for decades, and it was just videos of kids getting hurt, not injured, but hurt. We watch those videos and you just laugh, and you probably have one going through your mind over and over again. And it's one thing to be able to watch those and be able to have that feeling and think wow, that was ridiculous. What were you thinking to do that? But then what I've realized now that I have my own child that hurts herself in crazy, ridiculous ways. Just this last week, she was determined that she was going to help wash the dishes or something, and she rolled an exercise ball that we had in the living room right up to the sink, because that makes a great stool. She's there on the exercise ball. And if you can just imagine, the most dramatic, crazy fall, from standing up to her feet, to rolling her entire back on it, to her head bouncing off of it, her feet directly up into the air. Just the most dramatic bounce into the air in the world. Now don't worry, her dad used to be an athlete, so he jumped in and caught her, and she's fine. She never hit the ground or anything like that. But in that moment, honestly, as somebody who is sick enough to watch all those videos growing up and think that's hilarious when kids do that, when she does something so silly, I don't have the thought of, you're ridiculous, what are you doing? Why don't you know better? My only thought and feeling towards her is compassion. It's compassion. She doesn't know any better. She's helpless for that. She was just doing this to others. He knew he was going to heal. He knew he was going to solve those problems, but still, he felt that. And it's funny because it's in this same passage where Jesus had this feeling of compassion that he then made the statement, the harvest is plenty. There are plenty of people who are harassed and helpless. We know that. We've seen it. The harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. And in this context, you can even see what Jesus is also saying is there are few people with this same compassion, whose guts are just wrenched by the world being helpless and harassed. And so his solution there are few people who feel this, is pray to the Lord of the harvest to send workers. And I think one of the things that this prayer is about here is praying to God, God, give me that same compassion. God, give me that same gut feeling towards those who are harassed and helpless. And I think we have to pause and we have to consider, as we see this great compassion of God, do we have that same feeling? Or God, when we see the suffering of others, when we see the sin of others, when we just see those who are like sheep without a shepherd, do we feel those same feelings of compassion? And if not, I think the call is not just try harder, try to care, but pray to the Lord of the harvest. God, give me mercy, give me compassion like you have. God, make me care like that. Make me like that. Because as we seek to live in this world in order to display Christ, and there are people in our lives that we want to know him, one of the ways that we can display and tell them about him is by showing the same compassion. Why do you care? Because my God cares. I didn't always, but I prayed, God, give me the same heart, give me that gut feeling that you have towards these people. So God is merciful, he's compassionate. And the next one here, God is also gracious. God is gracious. And the word here that's in the Hebrew it's chanun. And it's actually not a feeling, just like the previous one was. This is an action word. This is a verb that's used here of gracious. And it means to show grace or favor. It's something you do. It's a really big concept. You'll probably know that grace throughout the Bible is a huge concept. It just covers a lot. And one commentator, Dan Doriani, described it like this. He said that graciousness in this case is love's delight in bestowing favors. Love's delight in bestowing favors. And if you connect it to that parental love that we already talked about with God, then it's this parental love that doesn't just want to take the kids out to ice cream and give them a good gift when they've been really good as a reward. And it's not the kind of love and compassion that would say, well, I'm going to do it because the kids are bad and hopefully I can manipulate them and get them to do something else. It's just joy in giving your kids a good thing that would lead to taking out to ice cream this time. It's just because a gracious parent does that, bestows blessings. Not because they've been naughty, not because they've been particularly good, but because it takes joy in giving good gifts. And that's the description of grace that we're given here. That God does this just because he likes to give good gifts. We see examples of this places like Joel chapter 2, where it says, rend your hearts and not your garments. Return to your Lord, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and he relents over disaster. Just come back to me. I'm not going to punish you. I'm only going to give you good things. Don't be afraid to be near me. I'm the God who just wants good for you. And Joel is essentially saying, you guys are in huge trouble. But the good news is God is so gracious. He takes joy in giving you good things. Or another place this word is used is in Exodus chapter 22, where it says that if you borrowed your neighbor's coat, it's this really fascinating thing. If you ever take your neighbor's coat in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. And in this case, the thing that kanun means is give him back his coat. It is do this thing. Don't just feel bad. Sorry that you're cold. But it's a willingness to actually do something about it. And this is how God is describing himself. He doesn't just feel that way towards you. It's not just the rahum, just the feeling of love towards you. He also does things actually in reality for us. Gives us good gifts. He actually does something about it. And I think one of the big problems that we have in our culture is that oftentimes our feelings don't match our actions. There are plenty of people who are willing to say, wow, I'm so sorry. I feel so bad for you. I stand in solidarity with your pain, and I recognize your pain, and I see your pain. You're welcome. Anyway, I'll see you later. I hope somebody helps you. Right? What God is saying is he's not like that. He feels that way, and he acts. He does something about it. And I think we then have to pause and say, well, if this is what God's like, well, do my actions of grace match those feelings? Okay, if God has given me the feeling that, okay, this isn't right, or that I should do this, or this person needs help, do my actions follow? because God's feelings and his actions aren't disconnected like ours are. I think we have to express that in the same way. We see this all throughout. God is gracious. We see this in the way that Jesus chooses to love people and to select people that we would never choose. We see this all throughout the New Testament especially, because when you think about who these were during his time on earth, who do you think about? Shout answers. Who were Jesus' enemies? The Pharisees, right? The Pharisees. Love to hate them. They were literally the worst. They famously decided, hey, let's make a whole bunch of rules that aren't in the Bible, and then we'll put those on people, and then we'll do that, and we'll make people feel bad for the fact that we do them and they don't. And they hated Jesus. Funny thing is, they hated Jesus for not following all of their rules, and then Jesus comes on the scene and goes, wait, what did Jesus do? The Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was a Pharisee. He identified himself as a Pharisee of all. And even though the Pharisees were the worst, God chose Paul to serve him, and he loved him. He chose the worst of the worst to literally be his guy. The person that you would never expect, the person that you wouldn't say is good, the person that you would say, definitely not someone who would be his guy. And this is something that we have to see, is that God chooses those out of his graciousness that we would not expect. And oftentimes it's just a good gift of his grace to put people in positions of service for him. I think we all have to recognize if we are serving God currently, and it makes total sense to us because of how highly we think of ourselves, then we're doing it wrong. Because oftentimes he just chooses those that you would never expect, not because they're so good. And we see this in Acts chapter 26. Paul is in court, on trial. He's telling his story. And he says what he was doing before Jesus saved him. He said, I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposing the name of Jesus of Nazareth. I did so in Jerusalem. I not only locked up many of the saints in prison after receiving authority from the chief priests, but when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. And I punished them often in all the synagogues, and I tried to make them blaspheme. In this connection, I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission of the chief priests. And then at midday, O king, he's talking to the judge here, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, that shone around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. First thing to notice, if God loves his people like a father, Jesus takes persecution of Christians personally. Why are you persecuting me? Jesus takes that very personally. These are his kids whom he loves. But yet he still has grace for the persecutor here. And Jesus says to Paul, but rise and stand upon your feet, for I appear to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and a witness to these things, in which you have seen me, and to those which I will appear to you. He's like, I hope you like this blinding experience. Here's the purpose that he's going to have, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I'm sending you, to open their eyes, so that they may turn from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. You see here Jesus choosing and loving the last person you would expect, and giving him this calling to then go out and declare this message to the very people that he was in teams with, persecuting the Christians, and then just the outsiders, the Gentiles, just anyone and everyone. And this is very clear as something that comes out of his grace. That because of Jesus' grace, he says, hey, I've seen you, I've seen your sin, I know the situation, I know what I'm getting myself into. Yet I'm choosing you out of my grace, out of my love, out of my goodness, because I love to do this sort of thing. Choosing you to serve me. And I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom. I own everything, and you are now heirs to that kingdom. And you now have my spirit and are empowered to do all this work. And this is what he says. He gives Paul, of all people, the commission to go and to share the gospel with everyone. Anyone and everyone. And that is amazing. That's out of his grace. And so we believe that anyone and everyone can have an encounter with God, could show up to church here and receive that grace. Receive that grace. Find hope. Meet the person of Jesus who can change everything. We believe that. And I pray every day that people would know that God, that gracious God, who would choose them. And it's funny. That's an amazing, powerful paragraph. If you want to know like a quick summary, like what happens in salvation in verses 16 through 18, or you could go through that. Delivered from this, forgiven. And it's a beautiful testimony of the gospel. And I hear that, and that's amazing. And you hear that, and you're like, wow, Paul is so bold. That's so great. But do you know what response Paul got when he shared this before the court? Probably the same response that you would get if you stood up in your office and proclaimed all this. They're beautiful truths, but look at the response there. Festus said with a loud voice, "Paul, you're out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you mad." The King James has one of the best lines in the whole Bible here. All of your learning has made thou mad, right? Much learning makes thou mad. It's never been accused of me, but nonetheless, Festus. Okay, so you're saying you used to kill all these Christians, and then Christian God appeared to you and said, like, you're his man. And Jesus was a Jew, and Jesus is a dead. So what are you even talking about, Paul? Like, you are losing your mind. And Paul still says, no, this is who he is. This is who he is. And we have to be willing and able to declare to the world that this is who God is. He's a gracious one who would choose the people you don't expect. And don't be surprised when the response is not, well, it's so beautiful, that's so kind of you. No, the response is going to be, do your best. That's how it was for Paul. But it's true. Would you be willing to declare it? Would you be willing to display that graciousness anyway? Because it's true. So God is merciful, he's compassionate, he's gracious. This last one here, he's slow to anger. Slow to anger. The Hebrew word there is Eric Apayan. Eric meaning slow. That's why his parents named him that. Apayan meaning nostrils. Right? Long in nostrils. I'm teasing. Eric's pretty fast driver, we should say. But this is, I think, the coolest picture of God. The coolest picture of God. God is long in nostrils. And it's translated there as slow to anger, which is a great translation, because literally, yeah, it's weird. Why would it say he's long in nostrils? But what that means is that he has a long fuse. That he's very, very slow to get angry. What it means there is that he's so patient and that he often withholds correction. He withholds correction. And the reasons we probably understand, like, we even connect anger to the face, right? You get red in the face when you're fuming. Little veins pop out here and there. And a flared nostril is a sign that a person's really angry. But before the anger boils up to explode out of the head, the description is of God just going, and instead of blowing up, it's like he releases all of that. And he has every right to be furious and angry. But as he looks at sin, at evil, at everything that he has the right to be angry about, he's just taking deep breaths and being very patient and withholding his correction. He's withholding it. I don't know if you noticed this, but I don't know what cartoon character comes to your mind when I think of anger, but I think of the one from Inside Out, named Anger. Dude doesn't even have a nose. That's his issue. That's his big issue. If he had long nostrils, it would help him out. But this is the picture that we get of God. That God is in complete emotional control of himself. Because when you lose it and you are turning into whatever version of a rage monster you are able to turn into, you know that anger can just feel like it spirals out of control. It just goes, it's just gone. It's a raging fire, it got out of the fireplace, and now it's just gone. God is in complete control every single time. At rebellion, wickedness, and sin, he does not snap. He doesn't snap. He doesn't lose it. one of my favorite proverbs. If I made a top 10 list, it's number 4 currently. Proverbs 19:11 says, "Good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is to his glory to overlook an offense." Another version says, "Having long nostrils is wisdom. Good sense makes one slow to anger." Good sense is having those long nostrils, because it is to one's glory to overlook an offense. I think this is one of the most countercultural proverbs out there, because this is the opposite of almost 2025 America, where the idea that it is to one's glory to overlook an offense is not there, right? To look at something that would infuriate you and offend you, that was personally done against you, and then just to choose to not be upset or offended by that, is not what our culture values, right? We live in a culture and a world that wants people to be offended, and that actually values and glorifies a person's offenses. And the more offended you are in our culture, actually the more valuable your opinions are. And it's this horrible economy of ideas that we have in this. And we have to see in Scripture here that the most important things about you are not what has been done to you or what you have to be offended. And you've probably experienced this to be true when you have done something rude, unkind, just, ridiculous against someone, a friend, a boss, maybe a parent, and they had every right to be angry, they had every right to snap at you, but they didn't make a big thing about it, they didn't, come at you, they didn't remind you of it later, they just overlooked it. If you've ever had that happen, you look at that person and you just think, that's amazing that they would just not even bring it up again. It's amazing that they would just overlook that. God gets angry and it hasn't. That's just who he is. Stories of people who are not like this, all over the place. People are very quick to let the anger go from the nose to the head to the hands, and people die every single day because their nostrils are not long enough. And what we're told about God is that is not a fear that we have to have around him. He's not a God who snaps. He's not a God who just snaps and loses control. He's not like that. And this, frankly, is not the picture that a lot of people have of the God of the Bible. It's pretty common for people to think Jesus is the nice guy. It's like this weird cosmic good cop, bad cop thing, where Jesus is the nice guy, and then the God of the Old Testament is just cranky. Like, he needs a nap and a Snickers, and then, come back when you're feeling better, buddy. But he is angry all the time. And the God of the Old Testament identifies himself as, no, I'm not that way. I'm slow to anger. I'm patient. And every time you see God's anger in the Bible, then you can know that it took him a long time to get to that point. That he was incredibly patient before it got to that point. That he is slow to anger. He doesn't snap. He's not quick to punish in that way. And this is who God is. This is who God is. He's merciful. He's compassionate. All the different times that I've snapped, all the different times I feel like my anger got out of control, the times that I didn't feel that mercy and compassion, my hope is not that now you feel bad, you feel shame that you're not measuring up, because we're measuring against God. Morgan's line was great. Hope you wrote it down. We're measuring against God. Of course, we're not going to measure up, but the point is not to leave us, but to look at God and say, wow, you're amazing. You're beautiful. Thank you. It's about you, not me. But then to also be motivated by that, because that is the God who's living inside of you and who has offered you his help in doing this. And to just say, God, make me more like you. God, give me those feelings for compassion that I don't have. God, give me the courage to actually act on that compassion and to actually do these gracious things. Or God, help me to be slow to anger. Help me to be more like you in that way. Because we have his help. And as we continue through this series, and as we continue to seek to tell the world of who God truly is, we have to be conscious of how are we reflecting this. And aside from just asking for his help, we have to recognize that the only way to reflect who God is just be closer with him, more time with him, know him better. The closer we are with him, the more we know him, the more we're able to reflect him. And so see this as a call to dive into the God. He's merciful, he's gracious, he's slow to anger. He's an end in prayer now. Would you consider that? As we worship him, this is the God which we sing to. So let's go ahead and pray. Father God, we thank you for your love. for loving us the way a parent loves a child. We just pause and reflect on the great powerful reality that is the God of the universe would think so much of us, would feel that of us. That you're moved in your compassion to actually act on our behalf. Give us good